As a user, nothing is more annoying than a website that hides its price. And as a user experience designer, I would argue this is a fundamental piece of information that people want, and therefore it should be front and center in our websites. However, I'm a hypocrite. I'm a hypocrite because if you go to my website, you're not going to find my charge out rates alongside my services. And even more controversially, if you go to buy one of my courses like encouraging clicks or finding clients, you won't find a price there either. It's therefore unsurprising that somebody on Twitter pointed out my hypocrisy. Anthony wrote to me and said, "Hi Paul, surely a red flag for a prospective student is the fact that you don't publish your prices of your masterclass. I understand that you're after email addresses, but wouldn't you prefer qualified leads to unqualified ones?" Anthony is, of course, entirely right, and worded it very diplomatically, if I may say so. He's right that it will raise red flags. But pricing is a complicated business and needs careful handling. You see, the value of something is never fixed. In other words, it's not merely the cost of the raw materials and the manufacturing equals how much something is worth. Many factors impact the value of something, most of which boil down to some combination of supply and demand. However, even supply and demand is not as black and white as you might think. Supply and demand isn't just a simple calculation because perception alters it. If something is perceived as being in high demand, even if it's not, the value of the product or service goes up. And the same is true if supply appears to be limited, even if it's not. Our perception of value is influenced by things like our context and our previous experience. And so if you provide the right context, you will see an increase in how much somebody is willing to pay for a particular thing. And many companies use this fact to manipulate us into paying more than we would normally be willing to pay for a product or service. Now, there's been a lot of bad press about companies using psychological manipulation in pricing to encourage people to pay a higher price than maybe they naturally would. The most common way of doing this is by exaggerating or overemphasizing the scarcity of an item as well as its demand. For example, Etsy talk about the limited supply on every single item on their website. And of course they do that because all of their items are one-off items, or the majority are, and so stock's always going to be limited. But they overemphasize the point because they know that it will create a sense of scarcity. And they also highlight just how many people are looking at exactly the same item that you are in order to overemphasize the demand. And although it's right to condemn this kind of blatant manipulation, we also need to be aware that it's impossible not to influence somebody's perception of price. Every element on your website will influence a user's perception of price, whether you mean it to or not. Design, copy, layout all subconsciously influence how much people consider paying for your product or service and how much they see it as being worth. However, people are not just influenced by our websites, they're also affected by your competition, reviews, previous experiences, and dozens of other factors. Even the presence or absence of the price on your website influences people's perception of value. Now, one approach is to be entirely upfront about pricing from the start. However, that gets complicated as well because people bring their expectations with them. When they come to your site, they already have expectations of price. Take, for example, my courses that I sell. How much would you pay for a class on encouraging users to take action on your site? Or if you're an agency owner or freelancer, how much would you pay for more and better clients? Now, your answer will depend on your previous experiences. If all you've experienced of online learning before has been things like YouTube or Skillshare, then any price other than free is probably going to seem expensive to you. However, if you bought an online course before, the price you paid for that online course will set your expectation. As most people have not paid for a course before, any price that I publish on my website is going to seem expensive. Now, of course, my website should address that. My website should sell the benefits of the course and why it's great value for money. The problem is that price is such an influential factor that it's often the first thing people look for when they hit a web page without taking the time to judge its value within a broader context. You get that, "What? I'm not paying that amount," knee-jerk reaction that is almost impossible to overcome once it's in people's minds. So instead, in my case, I encourage people to join a mailing list which allows me to lay out the benefits of the course through a series of emails before I eventually talk about price. And that means I get an opportunity to sell the benefits where if I published my price online, I wouldn't. However, as Anthony pointed out, the downside is that this can raise red flags in people's mind. The problem with my approach of not showing the price of the course is that it makes people wonder why I'm not showing it. It can potentially undermine trust. It looks like I'm trying to hide something. Some will presume it's a way of extracting their email address from them, just like Anthony thought it was, or in some other way manipulate them. Others will conclude that it's because the course is obscenely expensive, like when you go into a jewellery store that doesn't show the prices. If you need to ask how much it is, you can't afford it. That kind of attitude. Now, obviously, these factors could put some people off. However, thinking the price is higher than it actually is can sometimes work in your favour when you then reveal the price. And that's because the actual price looks lower compared to what people were imagining in their head. Now, you may consider all of this talk of holding off and revealing the price as manipulative. The question is, where does that line lie? Is it manipulative to use positive wording to present your product in the best light? What about a design that makes your product appear better than it actually is? If we all start to make our websites reflect the quality of the products that we're selling, there's going to be a lot of terrible websites out there. Now, yes, there are blatant examples of manipulation, ones that we almost all agree have gone too far. But there is also a big grey area. So how do you know what is acceptable and what's not? As you can see, this is a complicated business, and no one is going to have any easy answers here. So how are we going to decide what to do over things like pricing? As you can probably tell now, I've agonized over this subject endlessly, and yet throughout all of that thought, I can't give you a definitive answer. However, to my mind, there are two factors to consider and one technique that you can use to potentially make a decision. The decision of whether to show the price is going to be primarily driven by our audience. Once again, that emphasizes how important user research is. You need to know what their expectations of pricing will be. If your price is less than they were expecting, then it makes sense to show it. If not, then you should consider not showing it. However, you also need to take into account how they will react if you don't show it. Will it undermine trust? Will they believe that you've gone too far? It's their opinion that matters, not what you personally think. Now, it can be hard to know, but testing can help. Pricing is such a complicated issue that really the only answer is to be found in testing. For me, the result was overwhelming. Too many people would abandon my landing page no matter how much I tweaked it when I displayed the price. Now, bear in mind that the cost of my courses is only $267. They're not insanely expensive by any stretch, especially when considering the potential they offer in terms of bringing additional income for the people that buy them. However, because of users' expectations that courses were either really cheap or free, the price stopped them looking any further. However, as soon as I put the price at the end of an email series, I found that conversions skyrocketed because I had the opportunity to communicate the benefits of the course first. Of course, the conversion rate is only half the equation. I also need to consider how badly I'm damaging my credibility and trust by hiding the price. I'll be honest, there was an impact. There is a small minority of people who were seriously alienated with the approach. but generally, overall, it was bearable when compared to the games. But your situation might be completely different. The key is to not only try and quantify the benefit of one approach over another, but also to understand the associated cost with achieving that benefit. Only then can you really make an informed decision. Ultimately, and like with so many things, deciding on how to approach pricing comes down to listening to your audience. It really is that simple.